And like I said, Shambhasi was very clear that it is the common will of all of the most holy Orthodox churches that the problem of the Orthodox diaspora be resolved as quickly as possible, and that it be organized in accordance with Orthodox ecclesiology and the canonical tradition and practice of the Orthodox Church. That is, the existence of only one bishop in the same place, not overlapping territories. That's not out of that 2008 document. That's out of the Shambhasi document, and it was very clear what it said. At the same time, they were very cognizant of the fact that we have a lot of ethnic jurisdictions. We've got a lot of people from various groups with different perspectives, and it went on to say they expressed concern that for the development of a common action of all the Orthodox of each region to address the pastoral needs of the Orthodox living in the region, including the diversity of national traditions, that the diversity of national traditions may secure the unity of orthodoxy in the common communion of faith and the bond of love. So they were cognizant of the fact that we have a lot of different people in our pot here. A lot of people from perspectives. We have old calendar and new calendar. We've got a lot of things to solve. We weren't asked to make one uniform model, just one church that looked exactly alike. There's a lot of different Orthodox houses, just like our families approach things differently. Multiple families or multiple people in the same family. There's a way to bring that together and make it work. And this task is monumental for the construction of what this church will look like. So this Committee for Canonical Regional Planning has a major task in front of them. So they came up with something, just to let you know, that they threw out to the bishops and said, give us your feedback. And when they did that, they came up with this idea of ecclesiastical provinces, which basically broke the country into, in the proposal, a number of different groups, or regions. And then within the regions, if you had whole groups of ethnic parishes that needed to still have communication and deal with each other, with Russian or Greek or Serbian or whatever it is, they could still have an interaction through something called ethnic vicariates. And it would be not a formal, like a structure, they would be under a bishop, one bishop in an area, and the bishop would be over parishes of all jurisdictions, but in the area, the jurisdictions could still have the ethnic groups could still have some kind of gathering, get together, work on common issues, talk to each other, and so forth. Those of you that know when the Evangelical Orthodox Church became a part of the Antiochian Archdiocese, for a time they had the Antiochian Orthodox, the AEOM, Antiochian Evangelical Orthodox Mission. So that group, even though they're under the one bishop, they could still talk to each other and work together and even gather. They didn't lose their identity until they were ready to lose their identity. So they threw out this idea. This is not in stone. I would never want anybody to study it, to critique it, because it was just thrown out as an idea to break the country into all these areas where within each group there would be at least two dioceses, one bishop that's the head, and then two dioceses. And within the diocese, you'd have these ethnic vicariates. So it actually broke down into these regions. This was just a straw. And they were basically trying to get to the same population size within each group. It could end up being less. It could end up being more. It could be all over the place. But they just threw it out for discussion. So an example of an ecclesiastical province would be like the province of the Great Lakes. It could be Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. The see, where the head bishop would be Detroit. There would be about 98,000 adherents and 214 parishes. And every group, if you went back, you'd see the Northeast had smaller geographic areas because they had more people. And you had to get more people into it. So they threw that out there for discussion and feedback. And I would say this, the discussion was robust. And up until now, I felt like that some bishops are really fired up about the assembly. Others are kind of like, maybe you would be, that Great Holy Council is never going to happen, so why do we go through this? Others were lukewarm. I don't know anybody was actively against it, but probably inside maybe. But I think we had a mixture, but generally not totally engaged yet. The committee process was engaging everybody. but I don't know that everybody was engaged. I felt like the minute that thing got thrown out there, there was an engagement. I thought that there was a lot of robust dialogue. I thought that my perception, and I was watching really closely, was this, that after 3 years, the bishops were much more comfortable with each other. I saw a lot more joking around in the hallways. I saw a lot more just communication. I saw positive things like bishops saying that normally I knew of friction in their area, saying, hey, let's catch lunch, which I thought was a big deal, by the way. Let's catch lunch. Bishops that worked in there, and I saw at the tables when they ate that they intermixed among the jurisdictions. They just didn't sit in their own group. I saw a lot of that going on as it evolved. That was positive, but when this proposal was put out, there was, some felt that there was a reaction. And a couple of the churches, which tells you can't force unity. You can't force organizational unity. That some of the churches were shocked other churches with their reaction. And a couple of the churches, and Proto-Deacon says this on the video that's on the website, so I'll say it, the Bulgarian church, the Russian church from Moscow, and to a degree Rokor supported it, had issues with the structure. It kind of felt like we've had this giant influx in the last 20 years. Since Ligonier, something changed, which was this huge influx into America of ethnic Orthodox from Russia, from Bulgaria. And frankly, we could see down the road 500,000 Arabic-speaking Syrians show up here. We've got, it's not 100-year-old immigration now or 80-year-old immigration. We've got this new thing on the horizon. And so their feeling was, I guess, there's nothing wrong with the way it is. And that they kind of threw that out there, which I thought in the end was a good thing, because it's better to surface it. And what it did was it energized others to say, hold it. And so suddenly people were engaged in the discussion and the dialogue that, and those that might have been lukewarm, those that I knew personally were lukewarm, I watched them start talking and saying and defending the Orthodox unity and saying why it's essential and why we need it and why we have to have it. So what emerged was so many bishops who you might have thought were on the sideline, I watched in the hallways and at the presentation get engaged like I had never seen them before, and start to take this real seriously and start to think we better participate in the committees or something's going to happen without me knowing about it. And even there was a vote that up until now, we asked for volunteers for committees. Canonical Regional Planning was not one that they were knocking down the door to be on. They passed unanimously that because a bunch of people stood up and said, why aren't we on that committee? And we said, well, you didn't want to be. And so they voted to make sure every jurisdiction was represented on that committee, because now it's important. So I think that even though there was a shock about the reaction, that maybe the realities are that it's better to stay connected to mother churches, there was a groundswell that brought together thinking of those that have been historically for unity and those that have been lukewarm, brought them together and said, we better deal with this, and unity is important. And so I think it was a good thing to surface, and it brought it on the table, and now they're going to go out and they're going to start talking about it in a real serious manner. So that's where that caution comes in, is you got to approach this methodically. You can't get too far out ahead of one church or the other. We got to make sure, because one of the things Chombacy mandated was that when you get the game plan together, and when we have this great and holy council, it needs to come to us based upon consensus. That all those in the assembly have a consensus approach. And so they've got to work hard to come to something that's consensus, to take it to the great and holy council. One of the things that accompanied Chombacy was that if you don't bring us a plan, we'll impose one on you. And so we want to have a plan. And we all have that burden. And so, there was questions everybody started to question, what do we need to do and how do we need to do it? And the jurisdictions that wanted to kind of keep things the way they are, in a sense, woke the bulk of the assembly up, in my view. And one of the things they decided to do was, we know what Chomsky said. It read really clear. I showed it to you on a slide. What we're supposed to do. Whoever signed that Chomsky document, what were they thinking? And so we said, one thing we're going to do is go back to those people and say, here's the document. Tell us what you think it means. And we asked those churches that were interpreting it differently to go back to their mother churches and get us a clarity about what the language says versus what you think you signed. Now, I know people that were there, and I think everybody that Chomsky, that Fourth Council, knows what they signed. But at the same time, what it did was the discussion was robust. I don't think we have a setback. I think we have a positive step because it forced the discussion. And so that's what's going on. And I'll give you some personal observations. Proto-Deacon Peter, his observations was that, the same as I just said, that the mother churches surfacing these issues was a good thing, because otherwise we could have been working on stuff and then wake up and somebody vetoes something down the road. Now you can deal with it head on. And here's the head on. And I think it's doable. How do we take care of the new immigrants in the church that comes to us, that's unified, that's an American church? I think that's solvable. I bet we all think that's solvable. There's ways to make that work. And to take care of it, we don't not take care of our own. And I think that can be solved. And it makes you focus on now how you're going to do it. So I think that's a good thing to surface the issue. Like he said, the bishops appear to be more engaged than ever, and that the critical issue of how to maintain appropriate pastoral care to existing communities and immigrants, and at the same time fulfill Christ's mandate of unity and evangelistic outreach. And so, my only comment is this. My only comment is that we are under construction, and the assembly is not a church; it's a process. All right. If you go through the most important thing, and I've said this to many Orthodox organizations around the country when I'm working with them, I believe the process is sometimes more important than the end result. That how you do something, the manner in which you do it, is as important as what you're trying to get to. And if, while we're working together, every day that there's a committee meeting, every day they're working and trying to solve a problem, every day that it moves forward just a little bit, we're closer, we're more and more de facto unified. We're more de facto unified, we're gathering and we're working and we're gathering. So the key is keep this process moving and don't let it stall. And if we can keep the process going, we will naturally be unified. And then I think at the right moment, we don't know when it'll be, God will say it's time. Now it's time for the Great Holy Council. What we don't want to have is not be ready when they call the Great Holy Council. But keep in your mind, if I can leave with anything, is the process is the key here. And let's do it right. And we're going to hit bumps in the road. We're going to have issues. We know that. Satan will not want this to happen. The evil one does not want us to be unified. But every day we're working on the assembly, we're becoming more unified. De facto unity will ultimately result in actual administrative unity.
There's some questions? Sure. We'll have, I'll take 5 questions now, and then we'll move on, because I want to make sure that His Eminence has time. Okay, so
That's more than 5.
let's see, we'll start with Jeff.
Oh, I was wondering if there's any way for us to get involved or to help out with this.
Yeah, I think that the more people that show an interest, I think there's multiple layers you can get involved. One is, if you have a particular area of expertise that you think you can be helpful to, I would urge you to look at the list of committees, see if there's an area you think you'd be helpful to, and contact the committee liaison that's listed there, or the chairman of the committee, and let them know what you can bring to the table. And I think everybody that we want to bring people that have something to bring to the table to add to the team, absolutely. The other big thing you can do is be talking about this everywhere. When you run into your bishop, tell them you're behind the assembly process.
Chris?
Two comments. When that said that the bishops expressed concern for the both ethnic parishes and outreach to the Americans. The word to me is outreach. If we don't start getting a energized outreach operation in this country, more Orthodox churches will be closing because they don't have the growth that we need. We need people with white shirts, black ties, bicycles, and helmets getting out there and start spreading the word. Number two, would you confirm whether I'm thinking this correctly or not? If it was not for the communist uprising in 1918, we wouldn't be going through all of this because everybody had to come under the metropolia of Russia.
I'm not an Orthodox historian. On the second comment, my son is. You can go to his website. He's written about this. I personally think, from the history, that we would be here either way. The history showed we were already not unified at that point. That the jurisdictions were already starting to separate. The real history shows that I question whether we wouldn't be here today, either way.
Anna?
Does this plan in the end, is there an estimate that the number of bishops would be reduced in number?
They're throwing everything on the table. Everything's an option. That is something that's been, I know, talked about. Nothing's definitive, but there's discussion. What's the right number? It's going on.
Yes. Anyway, hold 1 second.
Yeah, I'm from a OCA parish in Santa Rosa. We're about 80% converts and growing rapidly. But there's an uncertain international understanding of the OCA's canonicity. Because internationally there isn't unity on this, how much of that is a hindrance to unity in America?
The OCA issues a challenge because of that situation, but what we've tried to do is emphasize here. It creates a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to organize this, but we've tried to emphasize here this is an assembly of all canonical bishops. The OCA is a full participant, and we try to just go past it as much as we can. Even though that's out there, they're a full participant in this assembly, and we want them on the committees, as consultants, OCA members are throughout the committees as consultants. It's a challenge, but it's not going to stop us.
Andy?
What is the decision-making process within the committees and with the overall assembly? Does it require unanimity of all 14 jurisdictions?
Yeah, the requirement of Chauncey is the decisions of the assembly are made by consensus. Now, consensus doesn't necessarily mean unanimity. There's whole studies done on consensus. And we've actually drafted a document that's got to come to the assembly that works on what is consensus, because someone could agree that I'm not going to vote yes, but I'm not going to vote no. And so there's a process that, at a model, the World Council of Churches actually developed a consensus process that we've looked at. And so ultimately it's consensus, not unanimity, but they're different.
I find this totally fascinating because this is something that I've wanted to see and questioned for years as to why it's not been. But I do have some concerns as far as, just questions actually. Number one, when you do these separations of the diocese financially, and who is one responsible for so the bishops are usually supported by their own, quote, ethnic or whatever group you want to put. Is that something that's going to be continuing? Is that something that's going to be this particular organization is going to be funding all these different dioceses? One question, because I just see a huge issue in that, not on my part, but on the various.
That's a great question, and a perfect example of what I mean by the work of these committees, how it's monumentally important to roll up their sleeves and address questions like financing, legal structure. People don't think about how, if you bring it together and you reshuffle the deck, how difficult that is. And that's a question that the finance group committee, along with the canonical regionality, they have to plug their work together. And how things are funded, how fundraising is done is part of that. So you've raised a great question. I don't have an answer because we're working on the answer. And that's a good example of why a lot of this is going to take time, because those are complicated questions, and you don't want to screw everything up while you're in the middle of transition. And if you've got an end plan and you're here, how do you get from here to here? That's got to be planned out.
And the second thing is I'm involved in a lot of organizations, and the one thing that I think has in the past prevented something like this from happening is the fragmentation of the various churches, either ethnically or however it is. And the change that has undercome in the United States, not only with the churches, but any other organization, is that we're in changing times. Okay? And diversity is where you have to be in order to be unified at this point. And including all the different groups and including all the different churches, etc., that's where you have to be for growth. And that's just it. And that's where the vision has to come about, and you have to express that for other people to understand what's going on. A lot of people have their fears of, oh, this is going to be that, just like what was started off earlier this morning. But my biggest thing that I've always seen with any organization that works is volunteers are the people who bring it about, but they're not the ones that can keep it going. You need to have executive directors, you need to have paid at the top people to run this, because you're not going to get it the other way. It's going to just flounder, it's just going to go, and this money has to come, not just from those donations that you're saying. I mean, that's true, a little bit here and a little bit there. But all the various churches, the mother churches, whatever you want to call them, they have to set a budget out within themselves. And they have that. They have to contribute to this, not to just their meetings, to pay for an executive director, to pay for the people that can actually be running this thing.
I want to say I totally agree with you about we've got to have a paid staff, people that are full-time focusing on this, got to have it. It's going to have to be funded. I'm not optimistic that we're going to get funding from the other churches. I think that they approved this, and then they went on, and some of them may be wondering what they did or didn't do, but they're not meeting, which is good, so they can't take it away. They can't take it away, but I think it's going to be on us to make it happen financially and organizationally, because they opened up a box, a Pandora's box maybe, of saying, go do this. Now we're going to do it. And I will tell you, when we started to build this, and Bishop Basil Essie was named the secretary, and he went to meet with the ecumenical patriarch and said, so I'm only going to do this if this is serious. I'm not going to do this if this isn't real. And he looked at it, he said, he said, it's real. And then another time, Archbishop Demetrius asked, if you tell them to meet, they're going to do something. And they're going to meet, and they're going to do something. Are you serious about it? And the answer was yes, we're serious about it. They should be. But the bottom line is, I think you're going to expect funding from those mother churches, because others are probably having buyer's remorse. So I think that money's going to come from us.
All right, George, and then we'll have 7 minutes come up.
I noticed that there is no committee for the parishes. And I make that comment because we cannot assume that what the hierarchs believe is what the parishes believe. And in addition, the mother churches play their own politics as far as we see it with the Bulgarians and the Carpo-Russians and so forth. So, because you may be surprised to find out that what their bishop is saying on the floor is not necessarily what the parish is saying. So my question is, why isn't there some form of communication with the parishes, both for informational purposes and also to get a feedback?
I think there necessarily will have to be. The question is, when's the right time First, you got to get it up and running. You got to get a communication structure built when you only have volunteers. Now we at least have a paid communication officer. It's just not time yet, but necessarily, and I think you made the point, you're not going to do all this unless you do all that. And so you're going to have to do it. It's going to be demanded. It's just not time yet.
Okay. You're in minutes?
Yes.
Are you ready?
I have no question.
Just
We
one
have
question.
time for more questions at the end, but I think
There's
you're
one
going to
question.
come and speak
Yes.
now.
Oh,
Please.
you may, Eric, you may not have an answer to this, but I saw your map with the proposed sizes of various.
Don't look at that too close.
Oh, well, I was looking at it, and the example you showed was the Great Lakes region involving 3 states, and it seemed like a very large number of parishes from an administrative point of view. So my question had to do with the size of these proposed administrative units. How big is too big? Some parishes are extremely large.
Well, they're doing studies on that. They're analyzing.
It seemed to me like you needed a more.
Well, don't misunderstand.
Possibly smaller structure.
Yeah, don't misunderstand. Within the structure, there's multiple bishops. Okay, that isn't one bishop. That's one big province with multiple dioceses, with ruling bishops over those dioceses. I don't know how many ruling bishops were in that structure. But one of the things the committee is looking at is making sure no one bishop has more than X number of parishes. And that's a small number. That's where you're talking about how many is the right number of bishops. It'll be one of the things they're looking at. So like when you saw those provinces, they could have 10 bishops underneath the main bishop.
Okay, all right. And just as a reminder, there is a website.
Yes, www.assemblyofbishops.org. We're trying to keep it more up to date. I get great emails from George when he says you guys need to be covering this or that, and I pass those on. And I think they're doing a better job of giving examples of when there's unity going on in America. But follow the website. I think there's more people working it than there used to be. It's still a little hard to navigate, but there's a team working on it. There's a wealth of information on that website if you start digging, including news of the other assemblies around the world. But one last thing. Ours is the largest assembly. We have 50 plus bishops, and if you add the others, 60 some. The other assemblies, they're easy. They're 6, 5, 8 bishops. We're the hard one.
You were the hard one.
Yeah.